Thank you again for joining this morning. We're very excited to have you here, and we're excited for our presenter today. We have Eric Fine from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. YPCCC conducts research on climate change, public opinion, and messaging, and he's going to share more about what they do, share some of their research and how you all can use that in your sustainability and climate work in your municipalities. So I'll hand it over to Eric.
Good morning, all. This is Eric Fine here in New Haven. Just to be upfront, I'm not a native Connecticut person. I've been here since 2014. I came for grad school and now have stuck around afterwards working with the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see that? Great. So when it comes to comms, we say the more you know your audience, the better you can communicate with them on any issue. And so the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, we've taken that to heart and been some of the pioneers in understanding, how do people think about climate change? What do they understand? What do they misunderstand? What policies do they support? And what are the roadblocks? Why aren't they taking greater action? And what are the best strategies, the best messengers, messages, and platforms to get different kinds of folks to better understand the issue and take more action? So we do research, and our main part of our research is a twice per year nationally representative survey called Climate Change in the American Mind, once in the fall and once in the spring, kind of taking the pulse of the US public so that we can see where they are on a bunch of different questions. Is it happening? Is it human caused? But then all the way drilling down into what kind of policies do they support. And then we also do a lot of international work and have done national surveys in Brazil and China and India and Ireland, and international surveys with 100+ countries at a time as well. And then we want to take all of this information and work with anyone like yourselves who's trying to work on climate change. How can they better understand their audiences, either using our data or using strategies that we come up with together for you to understand an even more niche or specific audience. And then we do experiments with partners as well to better understand, given your issue, your exact audience, your call to action, what are the best strategies for you? So I don't know how familiar you are with our work, but I'd like you to just drop in to the chat what you think the answer to this question is right here. I'm seeing 40 all the way up to 90, not quite sure what the average is in there. 20, okay. Now we got the full gamut. Anyone at 0? Can I hear a 0? Okay, and then let's zero in now and think about your county. And what percentage of people do you think are worried about global warming in your county, adults? And of course, this is going to vary depending on what county you're in, but we'll dig into the data and get county specific in a little bit. Okay, so right here, we can see that 70% of people right now in the United States say that global warming is happening. That's what this 70 is in the upper right-hand corner. But you can also see that when we ask people to guess at what other people are thinking, they say around half. They say 54%. 54% of people we think say that global warming is happening. But then we can drill down even more. Depending on who you are, your estimate will be very different. If you're a conservative Republican, you'll say 48%. Someone living in an urban area, Hartford, let's say, they'll guess 54%. But then we go all the way up to the liberal Democrats, and they guess 63%. There's a big difference there, but all of them are way off because it's actually 70% right now. And so we find that this happens across society. The everyday person walking down the street is wrong about what other people think on climate change, but also leaders in all kinds of positions are way off as well. This right here, one of our colleagues actually went around to senior staffers in Congress and asked them, hey, what do your constituents think about these handful of topics right here? And so we can see right here that they were way off on all of them, depending on whether they were a Democratic or Republican staffer. They were more off. And we were asking them about their constituents in particular. So on support for regulating carbon emissions as a pollutant, Democratic staffers underestimated support by 5%, and Republican staffers underestimated support by 31%. And then we asked them, well, okay, your job is to help your boss, the member of Congress, understand where their constituents are and how they should vote. How do you do that? How do you decide how to advise them on where to vote? And they say, oh, it's all about what the people want, public opinion. Well, here they're pretty off on the public opinion, as we can see right here. This misperception, depending on what kind of leadership position you're in, or depending on where you are in society, has different impacts, and correcting the misperceptions can provide different kinds of impacts as well. And so one upshot of this dynamic is that people assume that other people don't care about this issue. And so why am I going to talk to anyone if I think everyone's on a different page than me? I'm sitting down at the Thanksgiving table and I want to talk to Uncle Bob about climate change, but I think, no, he probably doesn't care about it. He's probably going to be pissed if I talk about it. He's going to get on my case. And Uncle Bob is thinking the same thing about me. So we have this spiral of silence that we call it. So, of course, we do these national representative surveys, but people say, oh no, but over here in my part of the country, it's different. It's not like that. So we wanted to better understand, well, how can we tell someone in Waterbury versus Putnam versus North Canaan what's going on and when it comes to how people are seeing climate change. The best predictor in the United States of climate change public opinion is your politics. This is not the best predictor in other countries, but because it's a polarized issue politically here in the United States, it's the best predictor here. And so this is just a map from the New York Times of the 2020 election results. So you can see that there's some good variation across our state here. And that probably predicts a lot of how people are seeing climate change. But you'll see that there's probably a lot more support in a lot more places than you would expect for climate change action. So let's dive into that. we created two resources, the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, where you can see climate opinion all the way down to the county scale, also at congressional district scale, metro area, and state scale. And those are fun to play around with and check out what your neighbors are thinking and how things vary. But then an easier way to present this information to someone, it might be in the fact sheets. So we see here that 65% of people, 65% of people in the United States say, sorry, trying to get a little control bar out of my way so I can see my slides better. There we go. 65% of people say that global warming is happening in the United States, but what about here versus there? 70% in Connecticut say that global warming is happening, but what about your section of Connecticut? Here we drill down and you can see that yes, there's variation, but we've got a majority everywhere. Fairfield County has 75%, and then the next year we have Hartford and New Haven in the lower 70s, and Holland, New London, and Middlesex all in the upper 60s, and then Litchfield and Wyndham counties at 62%. So yes, not a majority, not a large majority, but still a majority. Most people all across Connecticut are on the same page on this question. So then we get into other questions. There's 30 plus questions you can look at on the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. And one is regulating CO2 as a pollutant. We have high support for this idea across the state. 76% say we support this idea. And then it goes pretty darn red here. 80% of people saying they support tax rebates for people who purchase energy efficient vehicles or solar panels. And then 80% also say that kids should learn about climate change at school. And so therefore we also see some new laws popping up in different states, either encouraging or mandating climate education in schools. Yet we still have this issue, this spiral of silence that I talked about a minute ago, in that most people aren't talking about this. And we've done some experiments. When people do talk more about it, then they're all of a sudden more likely to say that it's happening, that it's human caused, that they're worried about it, that they want to do something about it by breaking that spiral of silence. So one of the best things you can do, that anyone could do, is to just talk about this more, because most people are probably on the same page as you. So I was giving a presentation on some of our data a few years ago, and there were some folks from the Alliance for Climate Education in the audience. And if you don't know this organization, they train teachers to integrate climate change into their teaching, no matter what subject they're teaching. And so these folks, ACE was running ads on Facebook to try and recruit teachers to be trained. And a lot of teachers were probably thinking, I want to teach about this. But people are going to be pissed at me if I teach about it. And so I'm probably going to get all kinds of negative feedback. Who knows where this is going to go? And so I'm not going to click on this thing. I'm not going to get trained to do this. And when ACE saw our stats that 8 in 10% in 8 in 10 adults say that kids should learn about climate at school, they said, wow, that's a pretty cool stat. They put it at the beginning of their little recruitment videos on Facebook, and all of a sudden their acquisition costs dropped by half. So now teachers are thinking, I want to teach about it. Everyone wants me to teach about it. Of course, I'm going to click on this thing and get trained on how to integrate climate change in the classroom. Like I was saying, we have the Yale Climate Opinion fact sheets. And these, if you just Google Yale Climate Opinion fact sheet, you'll find the tool. And you can create them in about 30 seconds for any state or congressional district or county. You can also customize which of these questions you would like to appear on your fact sheet. And then you also can click Spanish and create these fact sheets in Spanish as well. The Citizens Climate Lobby is a national, actually international climate change advocacy group, and they sit down with members of Congress to talk about climate change and to encourage them to create legislation or vote for legislation on climate change. And they've had great success with sitting down with these fact sheets and saying, hey, here's where your constituents are. Please, let's do this. And they've found this to be a useful tool. So we see that there's often higher levels of support for a lot of the solutions than there is actually belief that climate change is human caused. And so it's interesting. A lot of people want solar panels, like the idea of solar panels on the roof, but not necessarily for the same reasons. So we need to better understand as climate communicators, well, what are the reasons that a given part of the population or person is supportive of a certain solution, and we need to use that in our communications with them. So here we looked at why did people want to transition to renewable energy and found big differences between Republicans and Democrats. There was a lot of support, but with Republican areas of Connecticut, we're better off talking about the reduced energy costs and getting energy from sources that never run out and reducing water pollution than we are necessarily about talking about climate change or reducing global warming. And a lot of what we do in our message tests is we test different kinds of messengers with different audiences. And we've found in particular that there are a lot of really successful messages and messengers that work with folks who are all across the political and climate change belief spectrum. So here you can see some of the types of messages that we tested and that did well. And a lot of those messages that we're testing actually come from Yale Climate Connections. If you don't know it, it's our news service, and we have a daily radio program, only 90 seconds per day. It's on about 700 radio stations across the United States, including many in Connecticut. And we also have a map on our radio station of the different episodes. So you could go on and find a bunch of different stories from Connecticut. And when you can tell a local story, it can be powerful in engaging folks, because a lot of times people say, oh yeah, it's affecting people in California, but we're fine in Connecticut because we don't have wildfires here. So one of the themes of these episodes is, well, here's how you could tell that climate change is here and now. But then another misperception amongst people is that we don't have the technology, or it's too expensive to address this here and now. So the other main theme of these radio episodes is, here's how everyday kinds of folks right around the corner from you are addressing climate change in a way that has all kinds of co-benefits without spending $1 million, maybe even saving them a ton of money. And so here's just a few of the episodes. You can play around on the map and click the different circles and find different episodes, or you can search for different kinds of themes. If you have stories, and I'm sure you do, from the work that you're doing that aren't on this map, please reach out, because we would love to include them to inspire other people around the country and tell your story as well. That's everything. We've got a ton more research and a ton more pieces of advice based on what we've been finding. But I don't want to go too far into it. I want to tailor it to whatever's on your minds, so we can open it up for questions.
Thanks, Eric. That was great. I put a few links in the chat to some of the tools that Eric mentioned, and we can send those out in an email afterwards as well. So you can try out all the data visualization, cool data visualization tools that we just saw. But yeah, if you have a question, feel free, put it in the chat or come off of mute. And Amalia, go ahead.
I have two questions. One of them is someone who's starting to do surveys and trying to figure out about their validity, especially since we've looked at how the surveys, the political surveys were way off. Is I find that at this point there's a silent group of people that are not hit by surveys, that basically we are, because of the way people, get information, respond to information, answer surveys and so on, that we're not reaching, so that in a sense, our belief that in data is kind of difficult, because we're not sure that we really reached a big chunk of the population. So that's question number one. And question number two is, we're having a climate resilience workshop next week, and our mayor is a Republican who believes in climate change, but her constituency, she says, doesn't. And since she's a Republican, if you look at that, we're about 65%, that means that in her constituency, the 50% is all Democrats, and in her constituency, that means that 15 out of 50 is all the Republicans that will, basically the majority of Republicans in our community do not believe in climate change, do not want to deal with this. And so even though they're a minority, they have great clout, and we find that it's very difficult to get Republicans on board, whether it is into the sustainability team itself. I don't have any Republicans on our team, or even in this workshop, which is, there's a bit of lip service, but Republicans are very much afraid of their constituents. So if you can answer both questions.
On the first one, we've been getting that a lot since especially the last election, the last elections. And it's interesting when you think about the sensitivity of a political election, like 1%, 2% can make a huge difference on who wins. So your polling needs to be able to figure out that kind of precision, like where are we going to be within a few percentage points. If you're looking at whether 70 or 75% of people like solar panels, who cares? Like that's not, we don't have to be as sensitive because it's not going to make that big of a difference on that issue. Does that make sense?
And mostly it's still there's still a little bit of a problem, but it makes more sense to me. Yes.
Yeah, so there are certain parts of the population who are hard to find to survey, or that might not say what they're really thinking on surveys, and that influences the accuracy of political polling. And we have those same dynamics in public opinion polling, but we don't necessarily have. It doesn't matter quite as much.
Okay.
And then on the second part, it's interesting. Like, a lot of people assume the majority of Republicans say that climate change is not happening. That is not the case. So we're bad in general when we haven't seen the research at estimating what other people think, and we're bad at estimating what Republicans think. Republicans are bad at estimating what Republicans think, and so within any part of society, there's going to be a certain percentage of people that are alarmed about climate change, that say it's here, it's now, we got to do something. And we know that that's around 27% of the whole country right now. But it's not 27% of Republicans. It's a much smaller percentage of Republicans. We looked at Fox News watchers, and 14% of them were alarmed. Who knew? You don't see that that point of view represented on Fox News, but 14% of Fox News watchers were alarmed, and so one of the key strategies is, how do you find people within that 14% and support their voices? Let them know also, because a lot of them are afraid to speak out. Let them know what the true stats are about whatever the population is that you're talking about communicating with. But you are not going to be the best spokesperson to engage the Republicans necessarily. Who are the conservatives, and what do they understand and misunderstand about what other Republicans are thinking along these lines, and help activate them. And it might be that you have trouble finding those spokespeople or activating them within your community. So then how can you go outside of your community to find those kinds of spokespeople, and they can help you, or you can use their messages and their messaging and videos of them to help engage right of center folks in your community. But also, like I was showing with that one slide, like, a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans like this idea of transitioning to renewable energy, but for different reasons. So could be sitting down with you said it was a mayor who's Republican, but says that climate change is happening?
A first select woman, yeah.
First select woman. So does she know this kind of research that actually there are what Republicans are thinking? So our nationally representative surveys, Climate Change in the American Mind, we release multiple reports from each wave, and one is called Policy and Politics. So if you go into the Policy and Politics report, there's going to be a breakdown of, here's where Republicans are on this, and here's where Democrats are on all of the different questions. And we even break down further, here's where conservative Republicans are versus liberal Republicans versus independents, and so on and so forth. So her seeing that, the first select woman, might help her understand better the landscape, and what might make sense to do. But also, I think if she can talk about the non-climate reasons why she supports some of these solutions and use that kind of messaging, that can help as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a tricky situation, but not impossible. Who else?
We have a few in the chat, so I'll just read those out. And then if you type one of these in and you want to add, feel free. So from Dana, are the radio spots saved somewhere that they can listen to the old stories?
Yes, all on the website for Yale Climate Connections.
Great.
And you can also on the map, you can go in and see where the radio stations are, because there's a bunch of radio stations all around Connecticut playing it. So you can listen to it there as well.
From Karen, I'm very interested in the messaging. Do you have more information and specific examples of messaging on climate change and the various aspects of it for different audiences?
There are so many audiences. Where do we go now? So there's one colleague of ours who does message testing with right of center folks, and he's found that some people will tell you, hey, don't say that it's human caused. And so you'll be fine with people right of center, just say that it's happening. But he's found that if you say climate change is happening, and then that it's due to global industrial activity, so it's not your fault, but it's due to something bigger than us. That's we're outside of you, and then go straight into the solutions. That can be helpful. They're also, for right of center messaging, a lot about protecting God's creation has been very successful. One of the biggest themes across audiences is having a messenger from that audience, and them being the person to engage, whether that be farmers in the middle of the country or Latinas in Miami. When you get a messenger from the audience, that's most likely to be most successful. If you have more specific questions about a given a particular audience, Karen, I'm happy to go down that path as well.
Thanks, Eric. And Karen, yeah, if you have more specifics, feel free to chime in or put them in the chat. Next question is from Rick. Residents are generally concerned about climate issues. New London County, about 70%, but few show up to town commission or selectmen meetings to voice their concerns on any topic, so climate issues don't get funded. How do we get more people to voice their concerns?
I mean, one is letting them know what public opinion is in that area. Like I talked about correcting the misperceptions for leaders of businesses and politicians. But if you're trying to recruit volunteers and activists as well, and someone's thinking, I'm all alone, no one else is on the same page as me, but you start to let them know what percentage of people are worried about this, understand the issue, then you're more likely to get more people. But also, can you link it to something that they are passionate about and showing up for? Whether that be the soccer team, or the local brew pub down the street, or are you in an agricultural community, and that's where people are really passionate about those issues. How do you connect it with those other issues and have people from those particular interest groups or communities making those connections, and you maybe helping them make those connections in the meeting, in the meetings of the organizations that they're part of, labor unions, for example, or in letters to the editor as well, is a way to start it. But also, I mean, a lot of organizations look at the idea of a ladder of engagement, and it is a relatively big commitment compared to other things you could do to show up to a meeting. What are the other kinds of smaller asks that you can make to first engage someone before they want to get out there and show up to a meeting?
Do you have any suggestions of smaller asks or things that people might want to try?
You can be like kind of activism driven. You could be solution driven in themes to these asks. I recently bought a house and I wanted to put solar panels on it. And I know that individual level actions are good, but we need way more people to do them so that they become collective. And the more people you can bring on board with any individual action, the better. So I asked a few solar companies, hey, can we get a group discount if I get a bunch of friends and neighbors to get solar panels at the same time? And they said, yeah, sure. One of them in particular gave us a good deal. And so then I went around and started talking to all my neighbors to get them to go for solar panels, or just to show up to an info session on solar panels. We weren't asking them to take a political action. We were asking them to take an action that they might be interested in for multiple reasons already. And we could do as a group and kind of build some group momentum and cohesion before going on to doing climate related things. And then I started to recruit a bunch of those folks for more climate focused actions after that. But what can you do around solutions that brings people together in a non-threatening way as well at the beginning? And it could be sign-on letters as well, especially asking state representatives, the state government to take certain actions. Those are things so those are some of the first things that come to mind.
Thanks. Also in the chat, we have a comment from Christine from the State Department of Public Health Office of Climate and Public Health. And she shared a website that talks about climate effects specifically on human health, and also put in a plug for the Governor's Council on Climate Change. So check that website out too. She didn't ask a question, but if I could use that, Eric, as inspiration for a question, just if you have if there are any research findings related to how people think about climate and health that might be different than, like, is that a particular lens that you've seen something interesting with in the research?
One of our main partner entities in our work and our research is the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication. And their director, Dr. Ed Maybach, came from a background in public health and public health communications before getting into climate communications. And so a lot of their research is focused around the health piece, but then a lot of their partner work as well. So in the messaging itself, we find that if you say, hey, climate change, take this action, then we get less of a positive reaction than if we say, hey, health issue, climate change, take an action. then we get more action. And then it's interesting within the health messaging, if we say, hey, these poor people over here are really suffering, having negative health consequences, take an action, that's not as successful as, hey, kids in your area are having these issues, these health issues, take an action, please. Then you get a little higher than if you're saying, hey, homeless folks or poor folks or people in developing countries. The closer you can bring this to here and now, the better. And then we ask, who are trusted messengers? Who do you trust about this? Scientists, politicians, advocacy groups, and one of the more trusted messengers are your healthcare providers. And so in particular, our colleagues at George Mason work with a network of healthcare providers across the country, helping them understand how to integrate climate messaging into their practices.
Really interesting. Thanks.
That's really interesting, Eric, because one of our challenges throughout the nation, we're funded by the CDC Brace Grant. And one of our challenges throughout the states who are involved in the program are involving clinicians in our work. It's very challenging to get clinicians to be collaborative and partners because they're so busy doing their day-to-day. So if you have any tips, that would be great. We haven't even started those partnerships in Connecticut yet. We're still kind of a new program. We're about 2 years old, but very interested in engaging clinicians and hospitals to get them on board.
So I think there's some interesting lessons from another initiative. Another trusted messenger is meteorologists. And we found that very few meteorologists were talking about climate change when they were talking about the weather. And we started to try and figure out what was going on and how can we get them to talk about climate change. And one, they said, hey, if I do it, like, I'm going to get all kinds of negative feedback. And so we then got a few who were open to doing it and then surveyed them. They got all kinds of positive feedback, hardly any negative feedback. And so I wonder if there might be a similar dynamic with healthcare providers of thinking that they might get negative feedback and that people wouldn't be behind them if they did this. But then another barrier for the meteorologists was, I'm like crunching numbers and figuring out what's going on in New Haven County weather-wise, like, and it's such a dynamic thing. I don't have time to think about how does the climate fit into this? How do I put together graphics? So Climate Central, an organization we collaborated with on this, they then said, hey, we're gonna like mass produce all kinds of graphics and resources in real time that any meteorologist across the United States could pull in and say, hey, here's what's happening in the next 7 days, and here's how climate change is affecting it, and here's a cool graphic you can throw up this evening on the evening news. And so I don't know if there is a group already thinking along those lines with similar tactics with healthcare providers or not, but there could be promise there.
Thank you.
We have another question in the chat from William, who says, thanks for taking the time to talk with everyone today. And have you found that there are any conservative groups that have made substantial efforts to increase their marketing and outreach around this topic?
Republic NEN is one. Niskanen Center, NISKANNEN Center is one. The Citizens Climate Lobby has put a lot into this space as well, and now have one of their national conferences and lobby days is focused on just people who are right of center, and having them sit down with members of Congress. And there was a student group, Students for Carbon Dividends, which was started at a few universities, including Yale University, of universities where they would bring together folks from the Republican Club, from the Democrat Club, and from the Environment Club, and talk about the case for carbon fee and dividend, this one particular legislation or approach. And they've now spread to a ton of campuses. I've got a few other groups on the tip of my brain, but they're not coming out right now. I'll probably think of them in a minute. Oh, Audubon Society, you could say as well. Audubon Society, I want to say 8 years ago or so, did a multi-year study to try and understand the largest threats to North American birds. And they by far saw that climate change was the largest threat to North American birds. And they, unlike a lot of environmental groups, have a pretty good representation across the political spectrum. So they said, hey, if we start talking about climate change, are we going to lose all of our right of center members? That's kind of scary. We don't want to do that. And so we helped them then survey their membership. And they said, wow, our right of center members are twice as likely as people right of center nationally to say that climate change is happening, human caused, and that they're worried about it. We should launch a multi-million-dollar campaign. And they did.
That's cool. That was the last question in the chat. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask about, or?
I'd like to follow up just a moment, if I can, on Mary's question about, I'm sorry, Karen's question about messaging. Because we had, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with it, we had John Foley here last year from Project Drawdown. He's a proponent of positive messaging. And I know that I certainly understand your point that we need to know the audience before we can really address, what messaging will reach a particular audience. But if we take it up a few thousand feet, is there a better way to try to approach this issue in a polarized political situation than being, running around being negative and saying, oh, the sky is falling, it's doomsday. Now we may in our hearts think and know that it is. But if we can accentuate somehow the positive elements of addressing climate change, whether that's health issues, you touched on the benefit to future generations. Children is a big issue on which both Democrats and Republicans seem to agree in your statistical analysis about the effectiveness of that message. Health, jobs, saving money. So to be able to approach particularly conservative audiences with that positive message, has your research borne out any of that?
I mentioned earlier that we have an analysis, a segmentation where we split the U.S. public into 6 groups, and they are the alarmed, the concerned, the cautious, the disengaged, the doubtful, and the dismissive. And each of them is in a very different place, and we need very different strategies with each of them. Let's look at the alarmed first. Within the alarmed, there's a good chunk of when you ask them, hey, if you could ask a climate scientist one question, what would it be? They say, what can I do? And so they know it's happening, it's human cause, they really want to do something, but they're not quite sure what to do. Maybe they think that it's too expensive. Maybe they think that we don't have the technology yet. Maybe they think no one else wants to do it. And so how can it, for them in particular, they're probably one of your key audiences to engage to begin with, because they're already there. I want to do something. They just need to know what they can do. And so the positive, like, hey, we're over here right around the corner doing something. Let's do it together. And here's why we decided to do this one. Here's how effective it can be. And here's all the co-benefits for it. But then looking at similar strategies across the 6 groups of, hey, here's a solution. Let's do it. You're just selling the solution in different ways to the 6 groups. Because people all the way over in the dismissive and maybe the doubtful, they're gonna support solar panels on roofs because I don't want to send my money to the Middle East, my energy money. I want to do whatever the hell I want with my roof. This is my castle. You can't tell me what to do. I want to be self-sufficient. So then how do you then talk about those kinds of solutions, but with very different language, and probably coming with a messenger already from that group who has the solar panels on their roof. Maybe, I don't know if you know where it is, Kate. We, within our 6 Americas work, we have a book chapter on message strategies for the 6 Americas, and they break it down. Here are things to think about when addressing any one of these 6 groups, and recommendations on how to craft your message, what kind of messengers to use. I'll see if I can give you the link in a second here.
I think I just found it from 2014.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Make sure that's the one. Yeah, that's it. Did I answer your question, Jim?
All right, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
And I think that book chapter will be helpful for much more details on that question.
We are just about at 11. If anyone else has any last questions, or Eric, if you had any final messages you want to share with the group.
I mean, throughout history, in all kinds of movements, the advocates, the activists have often felt alone, and underestimated how many other people there were thinking along similar lines, until for some reason there was a shift in dynamics, and they won. And so similar dynamics are happening with climate change. But you, as the people doing the things and on the ground, are not alone. Most people in society are with you, despite it looking like they're not. When you can engage more of them, but also help the other people understand around you, the decision makers and the potential advocates, that they are not alone, and there are tons of people thinking along these lines in different variations, in different ways, and start bringing these folks together. That's how we're going to get the progress we need on climate change.
That is a great note to end on. Thank you, Eric.
Could you repeat it? They're alarmed, concerned, disengaged, dismissive, doubtful. I'm missing one.
Alarmed, concerned, cautious.
Oh, okay.
Is that the one? Okay.
I think cautious, disengaged, dismissive, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive.
Yeah. And
Okay.
Kate, if you can add the link to the whole project page about the Six
Mhm.
Americas, that would be great.
Sure thing. We can send that out too in the email afterwards. Yeah, Eric, thank you so much for joining and talking to us today. Thank you everyone for listening and for your questions. And we will follow up with an email that has a link to a recording of today's coffee hour and some of the research that we've talked about. So thank you so much and have a great Earth Day weekend.
A pleasure. Please, you can put my email address in that
Okay, great.
email, Kate, in case anyone wants to reach out.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone.